The USS Resolute moved through the darkness of space like a small fish swimming through an ocean full of whales. It was not a big ship. It was not a famous ship. It was simply a human destroyer doing its job, escorting a diplomatic convoy through the Outer Rim, territories where few humans had ever traveled before. Captain Daniel Harper stood on the bridge and watched the stars pass by on the main screen. He was a man of 43 years, with gray starting to show at his temples and lines around his eyes that came from too many years of staring into the void. He had served in the fleet for 20 years, and he had learned one important lesson in all that time. Space did not care about you. Space would kill you the moment you stopped paying attention. Commander Laura Mitchell stood beside him, checking the navigation data on her tablet. She was his first officer, a woman of 35 with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She had been with Harper for 6 years now, and she knew him well enough to read his moods. Right now, he was worried. He always got quiet when he was worried. "We are 2 hours from Kethra Prime Station," she reported. "All systems are normal. The convoy is maintaining formation." Harper nodded but said nothing. Behind them, 3 civilian transport ships carried diplomats, scientists, and supplies. And in the middle of that formation was the most important passenger of all. Ambassador Megan Pierce was humanity's best hope for making friends in this part of the galaxy. She was a woman of 50 years who had spent her entire career building bridges between different peoples. She had ended wars on Earth. She had negotiated peace treaties between colonies that had been fighting for generations. Now she had been given the hardest job of her life. She had to convince the Valorians that humans were worth talking to. The Valorians were old. They had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. They had built an empire that covered 1,000 worlds, and they had done it so long ago that they had forgotten what it was like to struggle. They looked at younger species the way a grown man might look at a child playing with toys. They were not cruel. They were simply uninterested. But humanity needed allies. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and humans had only been traveling in space for 300 years. They needed friends. They needed trading partners. They needed someone to teach them the rules of a game that had been played for millions of years before they even knew it existed. So, Ambassador Pierce had come to ask for help. And Captain Harper had come to make sure she arrived safely. The first sign of trouble came when they were 90 minutes from the station. Lieutenant Kevin Morris was the weapons officer, a young man of 28 who had joined the fleet because he wanted to see the galaxy. He was monitoring the sensor screens when he noticed something strange. There was a small energy reading at the edge of their detection range. It flickered for a moment and then disappeared. "Captain," he said, "I am picking up something odd. Sector 7, bearing 215. It was there for a second, and then it vanished. Harper walked over to look at the screen. Could be sensor noise. Could be a natural phenomenon. What do you think? Morris shook his head. I do not know, sir. But my gut says it was a ship. A cloaked ship. Harper trusted his people. He had trained them himself, and he knew that Morris had good instincts. Keep watching. Let me know if you see it again. They did not see it again, but the feeling of unease did not go away. Kethra Prime Station appeared on their screens an hour later. It was a massive structure, a ring of metal and glass that orbited a dead planet. The Valorians had built it 3,000 years ago as a meeting place for different species. It was neutral ground, a place where enemies could talk without fighting. A Valorian voice came through the communication system. It was cold and formal, like a teacher speaking to a student who had arrived late for class. Human vessel, you are cleared to approach. Docking Bay 17 has been assigned to your convoy. The High Commander will receive your ambassador at the appointed time. Do not deviate from your assigned path. Commander Mitchell raised an eyebrow. Friendly bunch. Harper smiled slightly. They have been doing this for 10,000 years. I suppose they have seen it all before. We are just the latest visitors. The convoy moved toward the station. As they got closer, they could see Valorian ships docked at various points around the ring. Most of them were civilian vessels, trading ships, and passenger transports. But there were also 3 military cruisers, their sleek hulls marked with the symbols of the Valorian Defense Force. Each of those cruisers was 5 times the size of the Resolute. Their weapons could destroy a small moon. Their shields could stop anything the humans could throw at them. They were beautiful and terrible, like predators sleeping in the sun. Harper looked at them and felt very small. The docking procedure went smoothly. The convoy settled into their assigned bay, and Ambassador Pierce prepared for her meeting. She was wearing her formal uniform, the blue and gold of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. She looked calm and confident, but Harper could see the tension in her shoulders. "Are you ready?" he asked her. She smiled. "I have been preparing for this my whole life. The question is whether they are ready for us." Harper watched her leave with her escort of Marines. He hoped she was right. He hoped the Valorians would see what humanity had to offer. But he could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. He was still standing on the bridge when the first explosion shook the station. The lights flickered. Alarms began to scream. On the main screen, Harper saw one of the Valorian military cruisers break apart in a ball of fire and debris. Morris shouted from his station, "3 ships decloaking. They came out of nowhere. They are firing on the station." Harper saw them now. 3 warships, bigger than anything in the human fleet, appearing out of empty space like ghosts becoming solid. They were Valorian in design, but their markings were different. These were not defenders. These were attackers. A message came through the communication system. A Valorian voice, that this one was full of rage and hatred. Death to the outsiders. Death to the traitors who would welcome them. The collective must remain pure. The separatists had come, and they had come to kill everyone. High Commander Zeltos, leader of the Valorian military escort, managed to send one desperate message to the human ship. "Human vessel, flee now. You cannot help here. Save yourselves while you still can." Captain Daniel Harper looked at the chaos on his screen. He looked at the burning station where Ambassador Pierce was trapped. He looked at the enemy ships that were tearing apart everything in their path. He thought about running. It would be the smart thing to do. His ship was small. His crew was untested in real combat. They had no chance against enemies like this. But there were people on that station. His people. Innocent people. People who would die if no one helped them. Daniel Harper had not joined the fleet to run away. He turned to his crew and spoke 2 words that would change the history of the galaxy. Battle stations. The bridge of the USS Resolute transformed in seconds. Red lights replaced the normal white glow. Screens flickered to combat mode. Crew members ran to their stations with the speed of people who had trained for this moment their entire careers. Commander Laura Mitchell pulled up the tactical display and studied the enemy formation. Her face was calm, but her mind was racing through calculations. 3 enemy ships. Each one was at least 4 times the size of the Resolute. Their weapons were designed to fight other Valorian warships, vessels that were among the most powerful in the known galaxy. The USS Resolute was not a Valorian warship. It was a human destroyer built in the shipyards of Mars. Constructed from steel and titanium and the stubborn determination of a species that had crawled out of mud and reached for the stars. "Captain," Mitchell said, "I have run the numbers. We are outgunned by a factor of 12. Our shields cannot take more than a few direct hits from their main batteries. Standard tactics suggest immediate withdrawal." Harper nodded. He had expected this. And what do non-standard tactics suggest? Mitchell allowed herself a small smile. They suggest we make them regret ever coming here. Lieutenant Kevin Morris had already powered up the weapon systems. The Resolute carried 4 railgun batteries, 2 torpedo launchers, and a collection of point defense cannons. It was not much compared to the firepower bearing down on the station, but it was what they had. "Weapons are hot," Morris reported. "All batteries are charged and ready. Torpedoes are loaded. Just give me a target, Captain." In the engine room, Lieutenant Amy Watson was already pushing the reactor beyond its normal limits. She was a small woman with short brown hair and grease-stained hands, and she knew every inch of the ship's power systems. She had spent years learning how to make machines do things they were never designed to do. Engineering to bridge, she called through the communication system. "I am giving you 120% power. The reactor will hold, but I cannot promise for how long. Use it while you have it." Harper felt the ship surge beneath his feet. The Resolute leaped forward, accelerating at a rate that would crush an unprotected human. But the crew was strapped into their stations, and the ship's internal systems kept them safe. On the station, Scholar Athos was watching from an observation deck. She was a Valorian scientist, her scales a pale blue color that marked her as a member of the academic class. She had been assigned to study the human visitors, to learn about their culture and their technology and their strange short lives. Now, she was watching those same humans fly directly toward 3 warships that could destroy them in seconds. "What are they doing?" she whispered to herself. "They must know they cannot win. Why do they not run?" Beside her, a young Valorian officer was trying to restore communications with the military command. He heard her question and shook his head. "They are insane," he said. "The short-lived ones are always insane. Their brains do not work properly." Athos said nothing. She kept watching. The Separatist commander, Overlord Vecthan, noticed the human ship approaching. He was a Valorian of ancient lineage, his scales dark with age and his eyes burning with religious hatred. He believed that his species had been chosen by the universe to rule the stars, and that contact with lesser beings would corrupt their purity. He saw the tiny human ship coming toward him, and he laughed. "Look at this," he said to his bridge crew. "The animals think they can fight us. Destroy them. I want nothing left but atoms." His weapons officer targeted the Resolute and fired. A beam of concentrated plasma shot across space, bright enough to blind unprotected eyes. It was the standard weapon of Valorian warships, a technology that had not changed in 5,000 years because it had never needed to change. Nothing could survive a direct hit from a Valorian plasma lance. The beam struck empty space. The Resolute had moved. Not slowly, not gracefully, but with a sudden violent burst of thrust that threw the ship sideways at an angle that should have been impossible. The plasma beam missed by less than 50 meters. Overlord Vecthan stopped laughing. "Fire again," he ordered. "All weapons. Saturate the area." His 3 ships opened fire together. Dozens of plasma beams crisscrossed the space around the human vessel, creating a web of death that nothing should have been able to escape. The Resolute escaped. It spun and twisted and dove through the barrage, like a leaf caught in a storm. Every time a beam came close, the ship was somewhere else. The human pilots were not following any tactical pattern that the Valorians recognized. They were simply reacting, moment by moment, trusting their instincts and their reflexes. On the observation deck, Scholar Athos leaned forward. Her scales had turned white with shock. She had studied human physiology. She knew that their reaction times were supposed to be slow, limited by their primitive nervous systems. What she was seeing was impossible. What she did not know, what no Valorian knew, was that humans had evolved on a world where everything wanted to kill them. They had spent millions of years running from predators, fighting for survival. developing reflexes that activated before conscious thought could catch up. When a human was in danger, their body took over. Their heart rate increased. Their senses sharpened. Time itself seemed to slow down. The humans called it the fight-or-flight response. It was their birthright, written into their DNA by a billion years of death and survival. And now Captain Daniel Harper was using it to dance through a firestorm. "Morris," he said, his voice perfectly calm despite the chaos around him. "Do you have a firing solution on the lead ship?" Morris checked his screens. "Yes, sir." Their shields are focused forward. They did not expect anyone to get this close this fast. "I have a clear shot at their port engine section. Take it." The Resolute's railguns fired. 4 streams of metal slugs, each one the size of a baseball and moving at 3% the speed of light, crossed the distance to the enemy ship in less than a second. They hit the Valorian shields. The shields flickered, strained, and then failed. The slugs continued through and struck the hull. They punched through 3 meters of armor like it was made of paper. They tore through the engine room, destroying systems that had worked flawlessly for 1,000 years. They exited the other side of the ship and kept going into empty space. The lead separatist vessel shuddered. Its engines went dark. It began to drift, powerless and wounded. On the bridge of his flagship, Overlord Vecthan stared at his tactical display in disbelief. One of his ships, a warship that had crushed 12 rebellions and burned countless worlds, had been crippled by a single attack from a vessel he could have fit in his cargo bay. "Impossible," he whispered on the observation deck. Scholar Aethys said the same word, but her voice was not filled with anger. It was filled with wonder. High Commander Zelthos had managed to restore partial systems on his damaged cruiser. He watched the battle unfold on his flickering screens, and he felt something he had not felt in 200 years of military service. He felt hope that the humans were not winning. They could not win, not against 3 ships, not even with one of them damaged. But they were fighting. They were refusing to run. They were buying time for the people on the station. Time that might mean the difference between life and death. He opened a channel to his remaining crew. "All hands," he said. "We are going back into the fight. The humans have shown us what courage looks like. Now it is our turn." His ship began to move, its wounded systems straining to respond. It was not much. It might not be enough, but it was something. And in space, sometimes something was all you needed. The battle had been raging for 17 minutes. In space combat, 17 minutes was a lifetime. Ships had been built and destroyed in less time. Empires had fallen in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The USS Resolute was still flying. It should not have been possible. The ship had taken 11 direct hits from Valorian weapons. Its hull was scarred and blackened. 3 sections had been sealed off due to atmospheric breaches. 2 of its 4 railgun batteries were damaged beyond repair, but it was still flying. It was still fighting. On the bridge, Captain Daniel Harper wiped blood from a cut on his forehead and studied the tactical display. The Separatist formation had broken apart. One ship was drifting dead in space, its engines destroyed by the initial attack. A second ship had pulled back to deal with High Commander Zelthos, whose damaged cruiser had rejoined the battle with whatever weapons it could bring to bear. That left one ship, the biggest one, Overlord Vecthan's flagship, and it was coming straight for the station. Commander Laura Mitchell saw it too. She had a gash on her cheek that was still bleeding, and her uniform was torn in 3 places, but her eyes were clear and her voice was steady. "The flagship is making a run at the station. If it gets close enough, it can fire directly into the docking ring. The civilian casualties would be in the thousands." Harper nodded. "Then we stop it." In the engine room, Lieutenant Amy Watson was performing miracles. Half of her engineering team was injured. 2 of them were dead, killed when a plasma beam had punched through the outer hull and vaporized compartment 7. But the survivors were still working, still fighting to keep the ship alive. Watson had her hands deep in an access panel, rewiring systems that had never been designed to work together. The reactor was running at 130% now, far beyond its safety limits. Warning lights covered every surface. Alarms screamed constantly until she had disabled them just to be able to think. A young engineer named Danny Cooper stumbled up to her, his face pale with shock. He was only 22 years old, fresh out of the academy. This was his first real combat mission. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice shaking, "the port power coupling is failing. If it goes, we lose the remaining railguns." Watson did not look up from her work. "Then fix it." "I do not know how. I have never seen damage like this before." Watson finally turned to face him. She was covered in grease and sweat and blood that might have been her own or might have belonged to someone else. Her eyes were exhausted but determined. "Listen to me," she said. "Nobody trained for this. Nobody expected this. But those people up there on the bridge are counting on us. Those people on that station are counting on us. So you are going to go to that coupling, and you are going to figure it out, because that is what we do. We figure things out. That is what makes us human." Cooper stared at her for a moment. Then something changed in his face. The fear did not go away, but it moved aside to make room for something else. Something harder. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and he ran to fix the coupling. Watson watched him go and allowed herself a small smile. Then she went back to work. On the observation deck of Kethra Prime Station, Scholar Athos had not moved from her position at the window. She had been watching the battle for 17 minutes, recording everything with her personal device. Her scales had shifted through a dozen different colors as her emotions changed from disbelief to wonder to something that she did not have a word for. The young Valorian officer who had called the humans insane was still beside her. But he was not talking anymore. He was just watching, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide. "Do you see now?" Athos said quietly. "Do you understand what we are witnessing?" The officer shook his head. "I do not understand anything. Our ships are bigger. Our weapons are stronger. Our shields are more advanced. How are they still fighting?" Athos turned to look at him. "Because they are not fighting with ships and weapons and shields. They are fighting with something else. Something we forgot we had." "What?" Athos looked back at the battle. The human ship was charging directly at the Valorian flagship, its damaged hull glowing red from the heat of weapons fire. It was a tiny thing, a fragile thing, a thing that should have been destroyed 100 times over. "Will," she said. "They are fighting with will." On the bridge of his flagship, Overlord Vecthan was no longer laughing. He was no longer even angry. He had passed through those emotions and come out the other side into a cold, terrible fury. The humans had killed his crew. They had destroyed his ships. They had made a mockery of everything he believed about the natural order of the universe. And now they were trying to stop him from completing his holy mission. He would not allow it. "All power to forward weapons," he commanded. "I want that human ship erased from existence." His crew obeyed. The flagship's main batteries charged to maximum power. Targeting systems locked onto the Resolute. In 3 seconds, enough firepower to crack a small planet would be unleashed against a single human destroyer. Captain Harper saw it coming. His tactical display showed the energy buildup, showed the targeting lock, showed the countdown to oblivion. "Morris," he said, "how many torpedoes do we have left?" Lieutenant Kevin Morris checked his systems. 4, sir. But their shields are still up. The torpedoes will not penetrate. They do not need to penetrate. They need to distract. Morris understood immediately. firing all torpedoes. The 4 remaining torpedoes launched from the Resolute's tubes and streaked toward the flagship. They were not aimed at the ship itself. They were aimed at the space in front of it, at the area where the main weapons were about to fire. The Valorian weapons officer saw the incoming projectiles and made a decision. He could ignore them and fire at the human ship, or he could intercept them and risk the torpedoes reaching the flagship. He chose to intercept. The flagship's point defense systems activated. Plasma bursts filled the space ahead of the ship, destroying the torpedoes in brilliant flashes of light. The nuclear warheads detonated harmlessly, their radiation absorbed by the ship's shields, but for 3 precious seconds. The main weapons did not fire, and in those 3 seconds, the Resolute closed the distance. Harper gave the order. All remaining railguns, target their shield generators. Fire. The 2 working railgun batteries spoke together. Metal slugs screamed across space and slammed into the flagship's shield projectors. The shields flickered, faltered, and then collapsed entirely. For the first time in the battle, Overlord Vecthan's ship was exposed. Morris did not wait for orders. He redirected the railguns to the flagship's weapon systems and fired again. The slugs tore through plasma conduits and power relays. Secondary explosions rippled across the hull. The flagship's main weapons went dark. Overlord Vecthan stood on his damaged bridge and watched his tactical display fill with red warnings. His weapons were destroyed. His shields were gone. His ship was wounded and bleeding, but he was not defeated. Not yet. He still had engines. He still had mass. And he still had hatred. "Navigation," he said, his voice cold and empty. "Set collision course for Ketura Prime Station. Maximum speed." His navigation officer hesitated. "Overlord, if we do that, we will all die." Vecthan turned to look at him with eyes that held nothing but darkness. "I know." The flagship began to accelerate. It was no longer trying to fight. It was no longer trying to win. It was simply trying to destroy, to take as many enemies with it as possible into the void. On the bridge of the Resolute, Captain Daniel Harper watched the enemy ship turn toward the station and understood immediately what was happening. He had won the battle. But the war was not over yet. The Valorian flagship was accelerating toward Ketura Prime Station at a speed that should not have been possible for a vessel of its size. Overlord Vecthan had redirected all power to the engines, abandoning shields and weapons and life support. He had transformed his warship into a missile, a projectile of metal and hatred aimed at the heart of everything he despised. Captain Daniel Harper ran the calculations in his head. At current speeds, the flagship would reach the station in 4 minutes. The station had no weapons capable of stopping a ship that size. The remaining Valorian military vessels were too damaged to intercept. High Commander Zelthos was still engaged with the second Separatist ship, fighting a desperate battle just to survive. That left the Resolute. Harper turned to his crew. They were battered and bloody and exhausted. They had been fighting for nearly half an hour, longer than any human ship had ever fought against Valorian opposition. They had already done the impossible. Now he was going to ask them to do it again. "Mitchell," he said, "what is our current status?" Commander Laura Mitchell checked her displays. Her hands were shaking slightly, though whether from exhaustion or adrenaline she could not tell. 2 railgun batteries operational. No torpedoes remaining. Hull integrity at 47%. Reactors at 135% and climbing. Lieutenant Watson reports that we have maybe 10 minutes before something critical fails. Harper nodded. "And our speed? We can match the flagship." "But sir, even if we catch them, what can we do? Our weapons cannot destroy a ship that size. Not before it reaches the station." Harper did not answer immediately. He was looking at the tactical display, at the tiny dot that represented his ship, and the much larger dot that represented the enemy. The distance between them was shrinking, but not fast enough. They would catch the flagship, but not in time to stop it with weapons alone. There was only one option left. Navigation, Harper said. Set intercept course. Put us directly between the flagship and the station. The navigation officer, a young woman named Lisa Park, turned to stare at him. Sir, if we do that, we will be in the direct path of their collision course. I know. Sir, that means they will hit us instead of the station. Harper met her eyes. I know. The bridge went silent. Every crew member understood what their captain was proposing. He was not planning to stop the enemy ship. He was planning to be the thing the enemy ship hit. Commander Mitchell stepped forward. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. Daniel, she said quietly, using his first name for the first time in years. If we do this, we die. Harper looked at her. He thought about all the years they had served together, all the battles they had fought, all the times they had saved each other's lives. She deserved honesty. Maybe, he said. Maybe not. But those people on that station definitely die if we do nothing. Thousands of them, including Ambassador Pierce and everyone else we came here to protect. He paused and looked around at his crew. They were watching him, waiting for him to make the decision that would determine whether they lived or died. I will not order anyone to stay, Harper said. We have escape pods. Anyone who wants to leave, I understand. No shame, no dishonor. You have all done more than anyone could have asked. Nobody moved. Lieutenant Kevin Morris spoke first. Sir, with respect, shut up and give us a target. A small laugh went around the bridge. It was the kind of laugh that people made when they were terrified, but refused to show it. Harper smiled. It was a real smile, warm and grateful. Thank you. All of you. He turned back to the main display. Navigation. Execute intercept course. Engineering. I need everything you can give me. In the engine room, Lieutenant Amy Watson heard the order through the communication system. She understood what it meant. She had 15 crew members still alive down here, 15 people who were about to die because their captain had decided to play hero. She should have been angry. She should have been afraid. Instead, she felt something else entirely. She felt proud. You heard the captain. She called out to her team. Give him everything. Bypass the safety limits. Override the emergency cutoffs. If this reactor is going to blow anyway, let us make sure it blows in the right direction. The reactor screamed as it pushed beyond any limit its designers had ever imagined. Warning systems failed simply because there were no more warnings left to give. The Resolute surged forward. On the observation deck of Kethera Prime Station, Scholar Aethys watched the human ship change course. She saw it turn toward the incoming flagship. She calculated the trajectories in her mind and realized what the humans were planning. Her scales turned pure white. The color of mourning. The color of witnessing something sacred. They are going to sacrifice themselves, she said. They are going to use their ship as a shield. The young officer beside her shook his head in disbelief. Why? Why would they do that? They can escape. They could live. Aethys did not answer. She did not have the words. The Resolute caught up to the flagship with 2 minutes to spare. Captain Harper positioned his ship directly in the path of the oncoming vessel. The flagship filled the main screen, a mountain of metal bearing down on them like an avalanche. Overlord Vecthan saw the human ship move into position and screamed in rage. They were trying to stop him. These insignificant creatures, these mayflies with their pathetic little lives, were trying to deny him his destiny. Increase speed. He commanded. Ram them. Ram them and keep going. Nothing will stop us. The flagship's engines pushed harder. The ship accelerated even faster, aiming directly at the center of the Resolute. Harper watched it coming. He had maybe 30 seconds left. 30 seconds to live. 30 seconds to think about everything he was leaving behind. He thought about his family back on Earth. He thought about his daughter, who was only 12 years old. He thought about the letter he had written to her before this mission. The one that was supposed to be opened only if he did not come home. He hoped she would understand. "All hands," he said over the ship-wide communication system. "Brace for impact. It has been an honor serving with you." The flagship was 10 seconds away. Harper turned to Mitchell. "Lavra, I am sorry I got you into this." Mitchell reached out and took his hand. "Daniel, there is nowhere else I would rather be." 5 seconds. The flagship filled the entire screen. Harper could see the details of its hull, the scorch marks from their weapons, the glow of its engines. 3 seconds. Harper closed his eyes and thought of stars. 1 second. Impact. The collision was beyond anything human language could describe. Two ships, each traveling at tremendous speed, met in a moment of absolute violence. Metal screamed and tore. Explosions ripped through both vessels. The flagship's bow crumpled against the Resolute's reinforced hull, designed to withstand collisions with asteroids. The Resolute was destroyed. Its hull broke into 3 separate pieces, spinning away into the darkness. Atmosphere and debris scattered in all directions. The ship that had defied a fleet, that had fought against impossible odds, that had refused to run when running was the smart choice, was gone. But so was the flagship's momentum. The collision had slowed it, redirected it, pushed it off course. The remains of Overlord Vecton's ship drifted past the station at a safe distance. A broken wreck filled with death and failure. Kethra, Prime Station, was saved. High Commander Zelthos watched from his damaged cruiser as the two ships destroyed each other. He saw the Resolute break apart. He saw the flagship spin away harmlessly. He felt tears forming in his ancient eyes. Pelorians were not supposed to cry. It was considered a weakness. But Zelthos did not care about weakness anymore. He had just witnessed something that would change his people forever. And somewhere in the wreckage, emergency beacons began to blink. Small lights in the darkness. Signs of life. The humans were not all dead. Not yet. The rescue ships arrived within minutes of the collision. Valorian medical vessels and emergency shuttles swarmed around the wreckage of the USS Resolute, their pilots searching desperately for any sign of survivors. High Commander Zelthos personally led the operation. His own ship was barely functional, but he refused to stand aside while others did the work. He owed the humans that much. He owed them far more than he could ever repay. The first survivor they found was Lieutenant Kevin Morris. He was floating in a section of the bridge that had somehow remained intact, his emergency suit keeping him alive in the vacuum. He was unconscious and badly injured, but his heart was still beating. Commander Laura Mitchell was found 30 minutes later, trapped under a collapsed beam in what had been the tactical center. She had burns covering 30% of her body and multiple broken bones. The Valorian medics who extracted her said later that they had never seen a living being with so many injuries still breathing. Lieutenant Amy Watson had been in the engine room when the collision happened. The engine room no longer existed. But somehow, impossibly, she had made it to an emergency pod before the final impact. She had a broken leg and a concussion and would walk with a limp for the rest of her life. She considered herself lucky. Captain Daniel Harper was the last survivor they found. He had been thrown clear of the bridge during the collision, his body protected by an emergency force field that had activated automatically when the hull breached. He had drifted in space for almost an hour before the rescue teams located his beacon. His left arm was gone, severed cleanly at the shoulder. He had lost a lot of blood. His heart had stopped twice during the rescue, and the Valorian medics had brought him back both times through methods that human medicine did not yet understand, when he finally woke up in the medical bay of a Valorian hospital ship. The first thing he saw was Ambassador Megan Pierce sitting beside his bed. She was crying. "Daniel," she said, her voice breaking, "you stupid, wonderful, incredible fool." Harper tried to smile. "It hurt. Everything hurt. Did it work?" he asked. His voice was barely a whisper. Pierce nodded. "It worked. The station is safe. Everyone is safe. Because of you. Because of your crew." Harper closed his eyes. He thought about the faces of his people, the ones who had stood with him on that bridge, the ones who had refused to run, even when running was the only sane option. "How many?" he asked. "How many did we lose?" Pierce was quiet for a moment. 117 souls were aboard the Resolute. 43 survived. Harper felt the weight of those numbers settle onto his chest. 74 people dead. 74 families who would receive letters telling them that their loved ones were never coming home. "I should have done better," he said. Pierce took his remaining hand in hers. "Daniel, you saved thousands of lives. You stopped the massacre. Every single person on that station owes their existence to you and your crew. It does not feel like enough. It never does. That is what makes you who you are." 3 days later, High Commander Zelthos came to visit. He walked into the medical bay with the slow, careful steps of someone who was not sure if he was welcome. His scales were pale, and his eyes were tired. He had not slept since the battle. Harper was sitting up in bed by then, his missing arm replaced by a temporary prosthetic that the Valorian doctors had attached. It was crude and basic, just enough to let him function until he could receive a proper replacement. Zelthos stopped at the foot of the bed. He looked at Harper for a long moment, as if he was trying to find the right words. Then he did something that no Valorian had done for an outsider in over 2,000 years. He placed his right hand over his heart, lowered his head, and bent his knees slightly. It was an ancient gesture, one that had been used in the days before the Valorians had forgotten what it meant to struggle. It was a gesture of profound respect, of recognition between equals. "Captain Harper," Zelthos said, "I have served in the military for 200 years. I have fought in 17 major engagements. I have witnessed acts of courage and acts of cowardice beyond counting." He raised his head and met Harper's eyes. "I have never seen anything like what you did. I have never seen anyone fight like that. I have never seen anyone sacrifice like that." Harper did not know what to say, so he said nothing. Zelthos continued. "My government has officially requested a full military alliance with humanity. Not just a trade agreement. Not just a diplomatic partnership. A true alliance. The kind we have not offered to another species in 5,000 years. He paused. "They want to learn from you. They want to understand how you do what you do. They want to know why a species so young and so fragile can fight with such ferocity." Harper thought about the question. He thought about his crew, about their courage and their fear, and their determination to keep fighting even when everything was lost. "I do not think I can explain it," he said finally. "It is just who we are. We have always been this way. Our whole history is full of people who refused to give up, even when giving up was the logical choice." Zelthos nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is the answer. Perhaps it is not something that can be taught. Perhaps it is something that can only be lived." He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Captain, the Valorian Collective has existed for 10,000 years. We have seen countless species rise and fall. We have watched civilizations grow and die. And in all that time, we have never encountered a people like you." He looked back at Harper. "We thought you were unremarkable. We thought you were just another young species, destined to fade into obscurity like so many before you. We were wrong." Harper met his gaze steadily. "Humans have a saying," he replied. "Do not judge a book by its cover." Zelphos tilted his head. "I do not understand that phrase." Harper smiled. "It means that sometimes the most important things are hidden beneath the surface. You have to look deeper to find them." Zelphos considered this. Then, for the first time since the battle, he smiled too. "Then I look forward to learning what else is hidden beneath your surface, Captain. I suspect we have only scratched the beginning." He left, and Harper was alone with his thoughts. A week later, the survivors of the USS Resolute gathered for a memorial ceremony on the observation deck of Cathura Prime Station. 43 humans stood together, many of them still bandaged and healing, and they remembered the 74 who had not survived. Scholar Athis attended the ceremony as an observer. She stood at the back of the room and watched the humans cry and laugh and tell stories about their fallen friends. Her report on the battle had been published across the Valorian Collective 3 days earlier. It had become the most accessed document in Valorian history. Millions of beings had read her words, had seen her analysis, had tried to understand what had happened in those 30 terrible minutes. Her conclusion was simple but profound. Humanity is not remarkable, despite their short lives and fragile bodies. They are remarkable because of them. They have learned to burn brighter because they know they will not burn for long. They have learned to fight harder because they know that every moment matters. They have learned to love deeper because they know that loss is always waiting. They are chaos and beauty and terrible, wonderful courage. And we will never be the same for having met them. After the ceremony, Captain Harper was fitted for his permanent prosthetic arm. A Valorian medical technician worked on the attachment, adjusting the connections and calibrating the sensors. "We can modify the design if you like," she said. "Make it more elegant, more refined. We have many options available." Harper shook his head. "Make it strong," he said. "Make it functional. Make it human." The technician looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I understand," she said. And perhaps for the first time she did. The galaxy was changing. A young species had arrived, a species that refused to know its place, that fought when it should have fled, that sacrificed when it should have surrendered. The Valorians were only beginning to understand what that meant, but they would learn. Humanity would teach them.